Many say that the Earth is a schoolroom of trying, testing, growing and graduating. But did you know that we actually really get tested by the universe and descended masters? Learn more in this video. You may be familiar with stories of God testing people in the Bible. I'm thinking of Job, who was tested massively by the devil, and Abraham almost having sacrificed his own son because God tested his faithfulness. These are extreme examples, but all of us get tested regularly as well, and there are specific times of the year when all of us get tested. Did you know that the Ascended Masters can give us a second chance if we failed a test? I'll tell you more in a minute. First of all, I'd like to say that the spiritual tests I explain in this video are not all the tests on the spiritual path of the Ascension. They are just the tests that I think are most relevant to you, my viewership. So having clarified that, let's dive into the first set of tests, the solstice tests, also called final exams by the Ascended Masters. We all have our so-called final exams twice per year, at and shortly before winter and summer solstice. I actually learned about these tests when I found my main spiritual source, the Summit Lighthouse. It's such a grace that the Ascended Masters have told us this, because knowing of an upcoming test gives us a chance to really prepare for it. Okay, so these two final exams take place around the summer and winter solstice. To be exact, the testing can begin as far as 6 weeks before each solstice and continue up until the very day of the solstice. In terms of dates, here is how it works. Every year, the summer solstice takes place around the 20th or 21st of June. So testing could start in the beginning of May. The winter solstice usually takes place on December 21st. This means that testing can begin as early as in the beginning of November. Every year around these times we are being tested. So now that we know when these tests happen, let's talk about what they could look like. The Summit Lighthouse Encyclopedia says, the final exams are very specific tests to be passed, usually on the very element that has held students of the light back. Unfortunately, many Chelas, students of the Ascended Masters, do fail their tests and do not expect to be tested. The Ascended Masters have said over and over again, expect the unexpected. So you might think, oh yes, I totally will get tested in this and that matter because I really lack X. And then boom, you get tested in a totally different area that you never saw coming. You could be tested in situations that usually make you really angry or on a habit of impatience. If unfaithfulness in a partnership is a problem for you, the most beautiful and attractive lady or man might cross your path and you get tested on your faithfulness right there and then. If you have children, they may do something that makes you feel very angry, like intentionally destroying something that's very dear to you. It could be your boss who yells at you for no reason. It could be your brother or sister, biologically or in spirit, who betrays you. It could be a teacher who wrongfully accuses you of having stolen something. It could be anything, really. The key here is that you need to know your psychology and know what your weaknesses are. I remember an example of a test of obedience that I once watched in a documentary about vaccines. The story went more or less like this. A woman told the documentary interviewer that years ago she was waiting in a doctor's office with her child so he'd get a vaccine. She felt uncomfortable about the vaccination but reasoned her feelings of unease away. All of a sudden she heard a very clear voice within herself that told her to leave the doctor's office immediately and not let her child get that vaccine. She was shocked, but she didn't listen. She reasoned again that the doctor's assistants would think she was crazy if she left now and that she wasn't being rational. Despite her sense of foreboding, despite of her Holy Christ self having told her to leave immediately, she stayed, and her child got the vaccine. Very quickly afterwards, she understood why she was ordered to leave and not get the vaccine. Her child had a strong reaction and became autistic. She regretted not having been obedient to the voice she heard and fought for many, many years to get her child back to where he was before this happened. As far as I remember, she was partially successful in doing many cleansing therapies with her child to get rid of the effect of the vaccine, but she regretted for the rest of her life that she had disobeyed God. In a moment, I'll talk about how to use the vile flame for these tests. But what always helps, I think, is to not be reactive. I know this is easier said than done, but it really can help pass a test. When something happens that wants to make you explode, breathe. Don't react right away. Call to God and the angels and deal with it in a calm manner. The test of the 10. The Summit Lighthouse Encyclopedia gives us a very simple explanation of this test. This is the test of selflessness, which always involves the test of the emotions and of the God control of those emotions through the divine ego, which can come into prominence in the soul only as a result of the surrender of the human ego. I'm thinking of the Good Samaritan who helped the traveler who was stripped of his clothing, who was beaten and left almost dead on the road. Even though he was a Jew and Samaritans and Jews despised each other at that time, the Samaritan helped him. He picked him up, nurtured him, and helped him heal his wounds. There were others who had passed by this poor guy on the road, and nobody cared to even look at him. This certainly could have been a test of selflessness. I'm sure the Samaritan had other plans and other things to do. However, he didn't say, "Oh no, I can't help. I have an appointment to go to." No, it didn't matter to him. What mattered most was to help this wounded man. Everyday examples of how we can get tested on selflessness are, for instance, whether or not you're willing to give up your seat on a bus or train for a senior citizen or a pregnant woman, or whether you're willing to reach out to an acquaintance you know is having a rough time instead of going to the movies or playing another video game. The list is endless, really. The dark night of the soul. Many of you are very spiritual and have probably heard of the dark night of the soul. The TSL Encyclopedia says, the dark night of the soul, karmically created by individual free will, is the test of the soul's confrontation with its own karma of relative good and evil. So in this test, our own karma returns, and when we come under the burden of our karma, our soul's light can be eclipsed for a short or long time. During those periods, you can feel like you're totally alone in the world. These tests are very individual because we all have different karma. This is a major test on the spiritual path, and it's the preparation for the dark night of the spirit, which is an advanced spiritual test further down the path of the ascension. Everybody on earth passes through the test of the dark night of the soul because we all have karma. But here's the secret. When you are advancing on the spiritual path, these tests can become more intense rather than less intense. Why? Because as you're getting closer to the reunion with your higher self, you've usually already worked your way through your less serious karma. And now that you are becoming more accomplished in a spiritual sense, it's time to confront the more difficult chunks of karma you have left. That's why many spiritual people who pass through phases of the dark night of the soul actually think it is the dark night of the spirit, because it is so intense. I can think of examples like a very close person to you gets into a serious accident. You lose a job, or you have to give up something that's very, very important to you. Going through the dark night of the soul can feel like you've been disconnected from your higher self for some time. I am referring to your Holy Christ self and to your mighty I Am presence when saying higher self. This being cut off can be a very depressing and dark, difficult time. Thank God we have the violet flame. Nobody ever said that before and during these tests we are not allowed to use the tools that have been given to us by the Ascended Masters. But before looking at how the violet flame can help us with these tests, let's touch briefly on one very important aspect of this testing process. Why should we care if we pass? Well, in our universe, it's either accelerate or decelerate. The Ascended Masters teach that staying at the same place is just not possible in the circumstances we live in. We go up the spiritual ladder or we go down. Going up means change. We need to change in order to be able to accelerate. You want to stay on an upward spiral to eventually win your ascension. Winning your ascension makes you immortal. But that's a whole other topic for another video. So here's the most important part of this talk. How the violet flame can help you pass your spiritual tests. Regarding the solstice tests, you can specifically prepare before the 6 weeks of testing begin. I'd recommend starting at least 2 months before the testing takes place, which means in the beginning of March and in the beginning of September. This would be each year. You can specifically think of situations that draw out your weaknesses. This could be anger, sadness, depression, impulsiveness, impatience, unfaithfulness, self-condemnation, non-forgiveness, and so on. This is very individual to each of us. Of course, you don't know if the situations you're imagining while using the vile flame will actually be the situations you'll be tested on. But we can trust that the vile flame will help us accelerate on our spiritual path anyway. The other tests I mentioned come usually more as a surprise to us and can hardly be foreseen. However, if you, on a regular basis, put these situations in the vile flame, this can be very helpful. Specifically for the test of the 10, you can think about areas in your life where you tend to be more selfish than others. You can transmute these situations with the vile flame. Before you start any vile flame invocation, let the universe know what specifically you would like to transmute. And then go for it. Visualize, if you can, whatever comes to mind and let the vile flame lead you and transmute the substances in you that weaken you. One thing is sure, the vile flame is your best friend when it comes to passing these tests and winning your ascension. Remember that I spoke earlier about a second chance when failing a test? It's true. When you feel like you failed a test or even multiple tests, you can ask the Ascended Masters for an opportunity to take the test again. I can't guarantee anything, but I do believe in the mercy of God. A common spiritual practice to do this is to handwrite a letter to one or multiple Ascended Masters and to ask them for further testing in the areas where you have failed. You then burn the letter and give a prayer to the angels to deliver your letter. I have also done this in the past, though I can't remember what the specific test was. But I wrote a letter to El Morya and asked him to be tested again. Because the Ascended Masters always answer our call or respond to our requests, I am very sure I was tested again in this matter and hopefully passed the test. However, be watchful about this. It will most likely not be the exact same test, but it will come in disguise. Don't forget to expect the unexpected. Start with invoking the vile flame today. It is truly the spiritual superweapon of this century. If you don't know how to invoke the vile flame, start with this video, Vile Flame Mantra for Beginners. Thank you so much for watching and have a great vile flame day.